In the dawn of an age, on the far western edge of Europe, beyond the familiar reach of early civilizations, lay the rugged lands of England. Winds swept across rolling hills and jagged coastlines, where scattered tribes lived in quiet rhythm with nature. There were no great cities yet, only earth, stone, and survival. But beneath this calm surface, forces were already in motion. Across distant horizons, empires were rising, and soon their gaze would fall upon these isolated shores. Beneath the shadow of expanding power, the legions of the Roman Empire would one day cross the sea, bringing with them roads, order, and the weight of imperial ambition. Yet they would not be the last. As centuries unfolded, new waves followed, Angles, Saxons, and Vikings, each arrival reshaping the land through conflict and settlement. Forests echoed with a clash of steel, and fragile kingdoms rose and fell in relentless succession, as if the land itself was being forged through trial and upheaval. From these cycles of invasion and endurance, a new identity slowly emerged, one not bound to tribe, but to land, language, and legacy. What began as scattered settlements would, over centuries, transform into a unified realm shaped by struggle and ambition. From the ashes of division, a nation took its earliest breath. Thus began a journey that would carry England from obscurity to the very heart of global history. And with that first awakening, the foundations were laid for a land not yet a kingdom, but destined to become one. In the distant echoes of prehistory, long before crowns and kingdoms, the land now called England lay untouched by the idea of nationhood. Dense forests stretched across the horizon, broken only by rivers and open plains, where early communities lived in quiet dependence on the land. Around 3000 BC, monumental structures like Stonehenge rose from the earth, massive stones carefully aligned, hinting at ritual, astronomy, and belief systems still not fully understood today. By the Iron Age, these lands were no longer silent. Tribal societies, most notably the Celts, had spread across the region, organizing themselves into distinct groups, each with its own leaders, warriors, and sacred traditions. Hill forts crowned the high ground, guarding territories shaped as much by identity as by survival. Trade routes stretched quietly toward continental Europe, bringing new goods, ideas, and tensions. Yet for all their cultural richness, these tribes remained divided, their rivalries simmering beneath the surface, leaving the land without a single unifying power. This fragmentation would shape their destiny. As contact with continental Europe deepened, so too did the pressures of change. Trade brought opportunity, but also exposure to stronger, more organized powers. Without unity, resistance would prove fragile. What existed was not a nation, but a mosaic of identities, bound loosely by land, yet divided by loyalty. And so, as distant empires turned their gaze westward, the stage was set for conquest. Thus ended an age of scattered tribes, giving way to the first great intrusion of empire upon these ancient shores. In 43 AD, beneath the disciplined march of imperial ambition, the legions of the Roman Empire crossed the sea under Emperor Claudius. What awaited them was not an empty land, but a fractured one, ripe for conquest. Steel met resistance as Roman forces advanced through dense forests and rolling plains, establishing control with calculated precision. Fortresses rose where tribal lands once stood, and with them came the machinery of empire, order, law, and the unyielding presence of Rome. From the conquered soil emerged a new world. Roads of stone carved straight lines through ancient wilderness, binding distant settlements into a single administrative network. At the heart of this transformation stood LONDINIUM, a growing settlement that would become a vital hub of trade, governance, and imperial control. Roman law replaced tribal customs, while baths, forums, and fortified walls reshaped daily life. Yet beneath this structured order, unrest never fully disappeared. Native tribes resisted in cycles of rebellion, and the vast distance from Rome meant authority often stretched thin across the frontier. As centuries passed, the power that once seemed unshakable began to fade. The Roman Empire, strained by internal crises and external pressures, could no longer sustain its distant provinces. By the early 5th century, Roman forces withdrew, leaving behind roads, ruins, and a transformed society standing on uncertain ground. The legacy of Rome endured in architecture, governance, and memory, but its protection was gone. From this departure, a fragile land emerged, exposed once more to the tides of invasion and change, as a new chapter quietly began to unfold. In the fading shadow of Rome's departure, the land once held by the Roman Empire slipped into uncertainty. By the early 5th century, Roman legions withdrew, leaving behind roads, walls, and a fragile order without its protector. Into this vacuum arrived new waves of migrants and warriors, Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, crossing the North Sea toward the shores of England. They did not arrive as one force, but as many, each seeking land, survival, and dominance. What followed was not a single conquest, but a slow transformation of the land itself. Anglo-Saxon groups established kingdoms such as Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria, each rising in strength while competing for territory and influence. Native Romano-British communities were displaced in some regions, absorbed in others, as cultures overlapped and collided. Old Roman structures still stood, but their purpose changed under new rulers. Amid this fragmentation, a deeper shift began. Language evolved, customs merged, and the foundations of a new cultural identity slowly formed across the island. In the midst of division, a unifying force gradually emerged: Christianity. Missionaries and monks spread across the kingdoms, introducing new beliefs that reshaped spiritual life and governance. Churches replaced old sacred sites, and Latin learning influenced administration and record-keeping. Yet political unity remained distant. Rival kings continued to battle for supremacy, and shifting alliances defined the age. Still, beneath the instability, the idea of a shared cultural world was forming. Thus began the early shaping of England, not as one kingdom, but as many realms slowly moving toward a single destiny. In the late 8th century, a new and violent force arrived upon the shores of England. From the icy fjords of Scandinavia came the Viking raiders, seafarers whose longships cut through northern waters with terrifying precision. Coastal monasteries, symbols of learning and faith, stood vulnerable against sudden coastal assault. The first recorded raid at Lindisfarne sent shockwaves across Christendom, marking the beginning of an age defined by fear, uncertainty, and relentless maritime incursions. As decades passed, these raids evolved from scattered attacks into sustained invasions. Viking forces began settling permanently, carving out territory in the east and north of England. This region came to be known as the Danelaw, where Norse law, customs, and governance took root. Anglo-Saxon kingdoms found themselves under immense pressure, forced into defensive alliances, while cities and farmlands were repeatedly contested. The land became a fractured battlefield of shifting control, where survival depended on resilience, adaptation, and unity in the face of constant threat. Amid this chaos, a figure of rare determination rose: Alfred the Great of Wessex. Facing near collapse, he reorganized defenses, rebuilt fortified towns known as burhs, and strengthened naval resistance against Viking fleets. His leadership marked a turning point. Resistance became structured, not scattered. Over time, pressure from Viking forces led not only to conflict, but also cultural exchange, blending traditions in law, language, and settlement. Thus, from storm and invasion, the idea of a more unified England began to take shape, born not in peace, but in survival against the sea-born warriors of the north. In the wake of Viking pressure and Anglo-Saxon resilience, the fractured lands of England began to shift towards something unprecedented: unity. By the 10th century, powerful rulers of Wessex gradually extended their influence over rival kingdoms. What once were isolated realms, shaped by tribal loyalties and regional kings, now started to bend toward a central authority. The idea of a single political identity was no longer distant. It was emerging through conquest, diplomacy, and necessity. Successive rulers built upon this fragile foundation, tightening control over contested territories and strengthening royal administration. Kingship began to evolve beyond war leadership into structured governance, where authority was supported by law, taxation, and organized council. Laws were written with greater consistency, and royal courts became centers of decision-making rather than battlefield command. Across towns and rural settlements alike, the idea of belonging to one realm slowly replaced older loyalties tied to separate kingdoms. Yet external threats and internal rivalries still lingered, testing this emerging structure at every step. Despite instability, a defining transformation was underway. Regional identities gradually fused into a broader sense of shared purpose, shaped by language, law, and governance. The concept of a unified crown began to solidify, not as an abstract idea, but as a lived political reality. What had once been a landscape of competing kingdoms was now converging into a single state under centralized rule. Thus, England stepped beyond fragmentation, entering an age where unity was no longer a dream, but an unfolding reality that would define its future path. In 1066, the fate of England converged upon a single moment of succession crisis. With the death of King Edward the Confessor, the throne became contested, drawing rival claims and political uncertainty across the realm. As noble factions gathered power, the land stood on the edge of transformation. From across the Channel, a decisive challenger prepared his claim, one that would soon reshape the entire structure of English rule. The conflict culminated at the Battle of Hastings, where shield walls met cavalry charges in a brutal struggle for supremacy. Norman forces, led by William the Conqueror, fought with disciplined strategy against the Anglo-Saxon army. As the day wore on, exhaustion and tactical advantage shifted the balance. King Harold's forces ultimately collapsed, marking a decisive turning point in English history. The battlefield did not merely decide a king, it determined the future structure of the entire realm. The conflict culminated at the Battle of Hastings, where disciplined Norman forces clashed with the English army in a struggle that would decide the fate of the crown. Amidst chaos, shifting formations, and relentless pressure, William the Conqueror secured victory, altering the course of English history. With the battlefield lost, Anglo-Saxon resistance collapsed, and a new ruling order began to take shape. Norman authority quickly moved to secure key regions, ensuring control through strategic force and political consolidation. In the years that followed, England was reshaped from its foundations. Castles rose across the landscape as symbols of control and defense, while governance became increasingly centralized under Norman rule. The creation of the Domesday Book recorded the kingdom in extraordinary detail, reflecting a new age of administration and authority. Language, culture, and leadership blended into a transformed society. Thus began a new chapter of England's identity, rebuilt through conquest and reshaped for centuries to come. In the centuries following the Norman transformation, England entered a turbulent medieval age where royal authority expanded, yet never without resistance. Kings ruled from fortified courts, but beneath their crowns lay a fragile balance of power. Nobles grew stronger, shaping politics through influence, land, and military force. As taxation increased and royal demands deepened, tension between crown and aristocracy slowly intensified, setting the stage for confrontation. In 1215, that tension erupted into a defining moment in constitutional history. Barons forced King John to accept the Magna Carta, a document that restricted royal authority and asserted that even a king was bound by law. Though not immediately democratic in modern terms, it planted a revolutionary idea: governance required accountability. Meanwhile, England faced external pressures, including prolonged warfare against France in the 100 Years' War, testing both military endurance and national identity across generations. As external wars drained resources, internal fractures deepened. The Wars of the Roses tore through the nobility in a brutal struggle for succession, destabilizing the throne and reshaping alliances across the realm. Yet from this chaos emerged a clearer political evolution. Power could no longer rest solely on royal decree. Law, consent, and structured authority began to define governance. Thus, through conflict and collapse, England's monarchy was reshaped, not weakened, but refined into a system increasingly bound by law and legacy. In the early 16th century, England stood at a turning point where faith and politics became inseparable forces. The medieval unity of Western Christendom was fracturing across Europe, and within England, Tensions between royal authority and the Roman Church were steadily rising. At the center of this transformation was King Henry VIII, whose reign would redefine both spiritual life and political structure. What began as a dispute over succession and papal authority soon escalated into a national rupture with centuries of tradition. The break became official as England severed ties with the Roman Catholic Church, establishing the Church of England under royal supremacy. This shift was not purely theological, it was deeply political, transferring immense power from Rome directly to the English crown. Monasteries, once centers of learning and wealth, were dissolved, their lands and resources absorbed by the state and redistributed to loyal supporters. Religious practice, governance, and national identity began to merge under a single authority. The consequences of this transformation reshaped the entire social fabric. Faith became a matter of state policy, and loyalty to the crown increasingly defined religious life. Europe watched as England broke from centuries of unified religious tradition, stepping into a new and uncertain identity. Conflict, reform, and consolidation followed in waves, strengthening monarchy while deepening divisions within society. Thus, from religious rupture emerged a stronger centralized power, and England redefined not only by crown and law, but by faith itself. In the 17th century, England entered one of the most volatile periods in its political history. The long-standing tension between the monarchy and Parliament of England intensified over questions of authority, taxation, and religious control. King Charles I ruled with a belief in divine right, while Parliament increasingly demanded a voice in governance. What began as political disagreement slowly escalated into a national fracture that would divide families, cities, and loyalties across the kingdom. The conflict erupted into the English Civil War, where England itself became a battlefield. Royalist forces defended the crown, while parliamentary armies, organized and led by Oliver Cromwell, fought to redefine authority. Towns changed hands, sieges scarred the countryside, and the war fractured the political and social order. In a struggle unlike anything before, the question of who truly governed England was decided not in court, but through years of relentless conflict. The war concluded with an unprecedented turning point, the execution of King Charles I and the abolition of the monarchy. England became a republic under Cromwell's leadership, marking a radical break from centuries of tradition. Though the monarchy would later be restored, the political landscape had been permanently altered. Power was no longer unquestioned. It was negotiable, challengeable, and accountable. Thus, from civil war and collapse, emerged a new political reality where authority itself could be rewritten by the will of a divided nation. From the 18th century onward, England entered an era where its influence stretched far beyond its shores. Driven by maritime power, exploration, and expanding trade networks, English merchants and naval fleets connected distant continents into a single commercial system. Ports like London became the heartbeat of global exchange, where goods, wealth, and ideas converged. Beneath this growth, however, lay an emerging transformation that would redefine the modern world. At the center of this transformation stood the Industrial Revolution, a period that began in England and reshaped human civilization. Factories rose where villages once stood, powered by steam and mechanized production. Cities expanded rapidly, drawing workers into crowded urban centers filled with both opportunity and hardship. Technology advanced at unprecedented speed, strengthening England's economic and military reach. Through innovation and industry, it became the driving force of a new global order, one defined by speed, scale, and interconnected markets. Yet this expansion carried deep contradictions. As influence spread across continents, so too did systems of control, extraction, and conflict that would leave lasting consequences in many regions of the world. The empire shaped global language, law, and governance, embedding English institutions into diverse societies. At the same time, it generated resistance and debate over power and justice. Thus, England stood at the center of a world it helped reshape, an age of immense progress and equally profound consequence, where global legacy was built alongside enduring complexity. In the early 20th century, England entered an era defined by global conflict on an unprecedented scale. The rise of industrial warfare and shifting alliances pulled nations into the World War I, where mass mobilization and trench warfare reshaped the meaning of battle. Soldiers left from cities and villages across England, entering distant battlefields marked by mud, machinery, and unimaginable loss. The war altered society at its core, changing how a generation understood duty, sacrifice, and survival. Barely 2 decades later, another catastrophe unfolded, the World War II. Once again, England stood at the center of resistance against widespread conflict. Cities endured relentless aerial bombardment during the Blitz, with London becoming a symbol of endurance amid destruction. Yet beneath the smoke and ruins, resilience defined the nation's response. Civil defense, unity, and determination shaped daily life, turning survival itself into a collective act of resistance. After victory came transformation. The global empire that once defined England gradually dissolved, replaced by a new international order. Social reforms expanded rights, welfare systems developed, and political structures adapted to a changing world. The experience of war reshaped identity, less imperial, more modern and interconnected. Thus, from destruction and sacrifice, emerged a redefined nation, no longer an imperial center of power, but a society rebuilt through resilience, reform, and remembrance. In the present age, England stands as the culmination of centuries of transformation, an identity forged through conquest, reform, empire, and reinvention. Its landscape reflects this layered past. Ancient cathedrals and medieval streets exist alongside glass towers and modern infrastructure. Cities like London embody this duality, where history is not preserved in isolation, but lived within the rhythm of a global metropolis. Tradition and innovation coexist, shaping a society that constantly redefines itself. As part of the United Kingdom, England continues to play a significant role in global politics, economics, and culture. Its institutions, language, and legal traditions influence systems far beyond its borders, echoing centuries of historical expansion and exchange. Yet modern identity is not solely defined by influence, it is also shaped by internal debate. Questions of governance, regional identity, and global positioning remain active, reflecting a society still negotiating its place in a rapidly changing world. These discussions are not signs of instability, but of ongoing evolution. Through every era, collapse, conquest, empire, and reform, one constant has defined England: adaptability. Its history reveals no fixed endpoint, but a continuous process of transformation shaped by crisis and renewal. Each generation inherits not only the past, but also the responsibility to reinterpret it. Thus, England's story does not conclude, it continues to evolve, carried forward as an unfinished journey between memory and modernity, history and future.